Om jag hade vetat det som jag vet idag om SSRI-preparat så kanske skulle han leva. Den 23 maj vaknade jag klockan 8. Och det var en sån där fantastisk vårdag. Himlen var knallblå och solen sken. Och det var så lugnt och skönt. Jag låg och månade mig och sen 20:08 så kom jag på att mamma kanske inte har tagit sin morgonmedicin. Jag måste gå och titta om hon har gjort det. Min mamma bodde hemma hos oss då. Och när jag gick ut från mitt sovrum så såg jag att dörren till Johans rum var öppen. Och det var ovanligt, för det var den aldrig. För hans rum, det var hans revir. Jag såg att han hade ritat någonting med en tuschpenna på sitt golv, så jag sprang in. Johan hade suttit på sin säng och ramlat baklänges med huvudet vridet. Ansiktet låg mot sängen. Hans stora blandrashund låg bredvid honom. Och när jag springer fram till honom och ska ta på honom så biter hunden mig, hugger mig i höger hand. Så att tänderna gick igenom. Och jag fick vänster hand under Johan och vände på honom och såg jag att han var död. Och under de här sekunderna där, när sanningen gick in att nu hade det hänt någonting som var totalt oåterkalleligt. Johan var död. Kände jag hur jag kom till gränsen av vad en människa klarar av.
One of the most awful things that a drug can do, perhaps the most awful, is that it can cause a person to commit suicide. It's awful not just because this is the end of a life that shouldn't have been brought to an end early, but because on the way to commit suicide, the drug can often cause great mental agony. It's awful not just for the person who does kill themselves, but for the family and friends they leave behind. Equally awful is when the drug causes a person to murder someone else. This too is awful for the family and friends of the person who commits the murder and the family and friends of the person who ends up dead or injured. This is a problem the antidepressant group of drugs have been known to cause for over 50 years. But now, at a time when even the pharmaceutical companies concede that their drug can cause this problem, there are experts here in Sweden actively denying that the problem can happen. One of the intriguing questions we have to ask is why people would want to keep this material about this group of drugs concealed from you. The drugs can be incredibly helpful, but they're only helpful if we know what the risks may be. Unless we know what the risks may be and how to use them wisely, this group of drugs, which should be a help, may cause more harm than good.
And Professor David Healy knows what he's talking about, having worked with SSRIs for 30 years. But why are the Swedes not informed of the risks? Well, the vacuum cleaner salesman doesn't only visit the doctor. Depending on personal contacts, experience and social status, the salesman knocks at the door of experts, authorities, media and politicians. The salesmen want the doctors to prescribe the same drug for a variety of diagnoses, and since the national health authorities use experts with ties to the industry, no one puts an end to this development or culture. Everyone seems to have something to lose if they show care and concern. The result is frightening. Today, SSRIs are prescribed for a growing number of diagnoses. Sleeping problems, incontinence, obsessions, eating disorders, menstrual problems, grief, cancer, COPD, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, anxiety, giving up smoking, as well as drinking problems, not to mention abuse diagnoses given to whoever overindulges in anything, and that the drug companies love. Examples being sex addiction, buying addiction, gambling addiction, and so on and so forth. Yes, that's right, people who often already have problems with empathy. And the list of conditions treated with SSRIs gets longer every year. SSRIs are even being prescribed to suppress a guilty conscience, but no one talks about it. It sounds far better if it's described as post-traumatic stress disorder combined with depression, or perhaps that you're battle-weary, been involved in a serious accident, or that a family member has committed suicide. Sarah Bostock in San Francisco wishes no one the same suffering and nightmare she was forced to endure. She calls on all Swedish physicians, politicians and lawyers to listen.
I'm here today to tell you about my daughter, Cecily, who died tragically in January of 2002. She took her own life. In fact, she stabbed herself in the chest. And she'd been taking Paxil for only 2.5 weeks. Cecily was a beautiful girl. She was a Stanford graduate. She was working as an exhibit designer at the time. She had many talents. She could play the piano beautifully. She could write well. She was an artist. And she, in the months before she died, she was struggling with some of the issues that a young adult often struggles with, what she was going to do with her life. And she began to have anxiety and trouble sleeping, and eventually sought medical help because of not being able to sleep, really. She was put on Paxil, and at first, the first couple of days, first few days, she was really very good. She was almost euphoric even, almost too good, you might say. But it changed quickly, and she became irritable and grumpy and very agitated, not her normal self at all. And at the time, she was living at home, actually, because her apartment was being remodeled. And I was very concerned about the change that I saw in her, actually, and I recommended that she go see her doctor. And so she did go to her doctor, and the doctor said, maybe Paxil is kind of bothering you. Why don't we try something else? So she gave her new prescriptions and told her to stop taking the Paxil. And that was the day before she died. So she stopped taking the Paxil very abruptly and started this new medicine. And, that night she was very pale, and she seemed very frightened, even though she couldn't say what she was frightened about, but she just, and she was very agitated. It was a very cold January night, and I woke up and I was shaking, really, because I was frightened, really. But anyway, I went back to my own bedroom, and then later, the cat came into our room, actually, and started meowing. It was still dark, and I got up to let the cat out. And when I came out, it was completely dark. I didn't like to turn on the light because it would wake me up further, But I came out, and then my eyes started to adjust, and I noticed that the door to her bedroom was open, and I knew she'd closed it. So I turned around, and I saw a shape lying on the kitchen floor, and it was her, and it was just awful. I can't tell you. And I mean, it was For a young woman like that to stab herself is just unheard of, really. I mean, she'd never done anything violent. She'd never talked about suicide either. I mean, it was just completely unexpected, out of character, totally bizarre.
The almost total cover-up in Sweden with regard to the risks of certain medicines has led to famous doctors simply appearing to be unaware of any possible problems. Ulla-Karin is a psychiatrist and chief physician in Stockholm.
Det där låter som en mytbildning som finns, att det skulle vara någon slags dödsmedicin. Det finns ingen vare sig klinisk erfarenhet eller forskning som visar att antidepressiv behandling är en dödsmedicin eller kraftigt ökar risken för att människor tar sitt liv. Men det finns väldigt mycket forskning som visar att det hjälper.
In healthy volunteer studies of this drug, people have committed suicide. In studies of these drugs used for obesity, used to help people stop smoking, used to help people who are anxious, people who aren't depressed. To go into these trials, you cannot be depressed. When the drugs have been used in trials like this, in trial after trial, there's a much greater number of people going on to try to kill themselves or to actually kill themselves than happens on the placebo, on the sugar pill in the same trial.
In order to sell medicine to pregnant and new mothers, the doctors even deny the risk of birth defects. Dee Mangin, doctor and researcher in New Zealand, believes that the price is just too high.
For women who use these drugs in pregnancy, particularly that first early part of pregnancy, there's an increased risk that the baby they're carrying will have birth defects, will be born with birth defects, particularly heart defects, and they can be extremely serious and in some cases life-threatening. The rate is low, but for those families where a child is born with a birth defect, the effect is devastating for the child, for the mother, and for the family.
One might ask, what would actually persuade Swedish physicians to start providing information about the risks of birth defects?
My name is Christian Delahunty, and when I was 27 years old, I had lost my mother, and my doctor put me on antidepressants in order to cope with her death. I assumed that what I was feeling was not, it was not just her death. I felt that it was depression that I was dealing with, a condition that I was told that I had. And being on these drugs, it just, it took over my life. It made me feel on some days that I was really happy. And then on other days, I just wasn't dealing well. So it had to be me. It wasn't the antidepressants that were creating these highs and these lows. So it validated the fact that I felt that I needed to be on antidepressants.
Women who aren't pregnant and maybe aren't even thinking about becoming pregnant need to know, when they're offered these pills in the first place, that there is a chance that they may get hooked to them, so that when they want to become pregnant, they will not be able to get off the pill. And at that point, they will have a terrible choice. They'll be on a pill that can cause birth defects, and they may not be able to stop the treatment.
This was my 5th pregnancy I was getting into. Throughout my pregnancy, I developed gestational diabetes, which for me was, in my other pregnancies, they were fine, they were great.
SSRIs as a group, and one or two of them in particular, double the rate of major birth defects. They double the rate of heart defects. They double the rate of miscarriages. That is, the woman, roughly 8% of women, when they get pregnant, the pregnancy ends in a miscarriage. On SSRIs, the figure is more like 15 to 16% of pregnancies end in a miscarriage.
The doctor that was there was not my regular doctor. It was not my OB, and she had gone out of town. So the doctor, as soon as I found out that I was staying, I told my husband that he needed to go get my Effexor, because if I don't take my medication, I would start to spin severely and get really sick. So it was important that I took it every single day. And when the doctor heard that I had said Effexor, he became alarmed and asked me, he's like, "What are you taking?"
They also increase the rate of voluntary terminations of pregnancy for reasons that we don't fully understand. No one has explored this, but more women who are on these drugs, perhaps because they don't care to be pregnant, they've lost the feeling for being pregnant, opt to have a termination of the pregnancy.
The doctor on call, when he found out I was on Effexor, immediately called down to the NICU and told them to be ready, that there was an Effexor baby on the way. That was the first time that I'd heard anything about an Effexor baby. The first doctor that was ever, showed me any kind of concern with taking medication in pregnancy. NICU came up, and as soon as Indiana was born, she wasn't breathing, she wasn't responding. They couldn't get her to take that first breath. She was limp, and I'm not sure how long it took them to get her to come around. It was a little while. It was scary. It was very scary.
I've seen a number of cases where a woman, after she's given birth to a baby who's had a birth defect, even then, when she wishes to become pregnant the next time around and knows there's a risk from the pills, she still cannot stop. I have colleagues who know about the risks of these pills, who are on the pills and who want to become pregnant and cannot stop.
I thought that because of what I had been told, that the danger to taking that drug was over, because they never said anything about breastfeeding. And I continued to take, and she continued to have problems.
One of the issues here is that some of the pharmaceutical companies, in some cases, from 15 to 20 years ago, when the drugs came on the market first, warned that women of childbearing years should use contraception if they're on an SSRI, because they knew there was this risk right from the very start.
She was 5 weeks old, and my sister and her family were staying with us because my brother had gotten married the night before. And I got up that morning at 8 and I fed her. And I propped her up. And I went out and I made breakfast for my family. And I went in at 10 o'clock to get her up to get ready, and I found her not breathing. So my sister started doing CPR on her, and the paramedics came, and it's all kind of a blur. Everything happened so fast. And we rushed up to the hospital. They somehow, I don't know how they did, but they got her heart beating after 45 minutes of CPR. And we sat there at the primary children's for a week. She was on life support. And they had done a couple of scans of her brain, and each one, it showed even more damage. And we knew that that was going to be it. There was nothing we could do to save her.
But the marketing of these pills has often been to women of childbearing years. They have been seen as the greatest market for the pills. And the companies have gone out and stressed that it's much more important that you go on an antidepressant, particularly during this period, because if you don't take an antidepressant and you're depressed and leave it untreated, that this can cause problems for your baby. They stress the fact that women who are depressed are likely to abuse cocaine or other drugs of abuse, and this is the reason why they should be on drugs like the antidepressants. Well, the antidepressants pose a greater risk of birth defects than cocaine does.
In Los Angeles, we found the well-known law firm that for a couple of decades has helped victims of SSRIs. One of the experts in the field of antidepressants is Michael Baum.
There are negative side effects to these drugs. They are molecules that have a reaction in the brain and in the system. And some people experience suicidal ideation, suicidal behavior, suicide attempts when the dose is increased or the dose is decreased of antidepressants. That's not widely known and was not widely known in the US and may not be widely known in Sweden. From what I understand, it's not well published. What's well published is that it's a safe and effective treatment. More needs to be said about the negative reactions that occur. For instance, the majority of people that are placed on these drugs are women, and they're women of childbearing age. What they need to know, and needs to be explained to them, is that the mechanism that this drug works by is manipulating a molecule, what's called a neurotransmitter, which is a signaling molecule for fetuses, embryos, while they're developing. And that level of that molecule gets manipulated by the drug and can cause birth defects, can cause cardiac birth defects. Actually, there's a Swedish study, a Swedish birth registry that has been responsible for tabulating a lot of this data, but it doesn't get out enough to the public in general. What you get instead is people are told, well, there's a high rate of depression amongst pregnant women, so they need to be placed on this drug. Swedish women who are pregnant need to be prevented from having postpartum depression.
När hustru var gravid med våra barn, vi var överens, hon är gammal sjuksköterska och klok i sig själv utan mina råd. Och om hon hade varit deprimerad då, så skulle jag aldrig ha tillåtit henne att ta mediciner som påverkar hennes hjärna och går över till fostrets hjärna. Aldrig under några som helst omständigheter. Jag skulle ha sett till att hon har fått terapi och orkar gå igenom det.
However, in Sweden, there's an increasing number of sites that tell about postpartum depression and how even 10% of the male population suffer from it. Why are no warning bells ringing? Women who through the ages have been praised and cherished for their beauty and motherly instincts are now taking pills that eliminate their sex drive, render them less considerate and put their children's health at risk. Perhaps the world's largest scam ever is going on right in front of Sweden's journalists, politicians and prosecutors. Ruud Koelen van Brakel is the director of the Dutch Institute for Rational Use of Medication.
I was surprised hearing that in Sweden there is a promotion to treat people after the birth of a first child, because in my opinion a depression after the birth of a first child is disease mongering, is selling sickness. This is a diagnosis rarely seen, for example, in the Netherlands. So what we see here, in my opinion, is a cultural phenomenon more than a medical phenomenon. And having said that, of course, there are people with postpartum depression, which is or postpartum psychosis, which is very severely, but that's a rare case. That's only a very, very, very small group of women that suffer from that. So to have a big marketing campaign stating that a depression after birth is a problem is ridiculous.
And this must certainly also be embarrassing for the Swedes that both media and authorities, in the case of suicide, often refer to a single man living in his own little world of SSRI, which of course the pharmaceutical companies are very grateful about. Göran Isaksson's world set against the safety of an entire population.
Det har skrivits om att det skulle vara någon ökad självmordsrisk vid behandling med antidepressiva läkemedel. Det är en ren spekulation. Det är inte på något sätt visat och det är i högsta grad otroligt.
We've just heard Dr. Isaksson say that the idea that these drugs could cause you to commit suicide is just speculation. It's not. If you get a pharmaceutical company medical officer or other senior person from the company in the witness stand under oath, and they're asked the question, can your drug cause people to commit suicide? They have to say yes. If they say no, they are breaking the law. If the media asks them, not under oath, can these drugs cause people to commit suicide? They'll say, well, in this case that you've asked me about, no, I don't think it did. In that case you've asked me about, no, I don't think it did. They'll endlessly say, in all the cases that I've looked at, I don't think I've seen a single case in which it actually did. And they'll convey the impression by this that the drugs cannot cause a problem. But if they're asked a direct question under oath, they have to legally say that yes, the drugs can. So to say that this is just speculation is quite extraordinary.
David Menkes from New Zealand is a member of Healthy Skepticism, an organisation of scientists and physicians from around the world. The text on their t-shirts is written by one of the most popular and loved public figures in Sweden during the 20th century, Tage Danielsson.
Suicide is uncommon. We'd have to say that the provocation of violence by antidepressants would be rare. But the analysis of the cases allows us to say with some confidence that this is a real problem that occurs at a low rate, but because of the catastrophic implications of serious violence, whether it's directed at oneself or at another person, is important enough to warrant both further study and adequate warnings for both prescribers and for the public who might receive such prescriptions.
In many European countries, long before the SSRIs came on the market, farmers knew that you keep your cattle out of fields that have got St. John's wort growing in it. Because this herb, if eaten by the cattle, can cause miscarriages and birth defects. The SSRI companies know that this herb, which is also a serotonin reuptake inhibiting herb and causes birth defects by this mechanism, They knew this before the SSRIs came in the market. What we have been doing since with the marketing of these drugs is to herd women into fields that have St. John's wort growing in it. That's what we're doing when we put people on these drugs while they're pregnant. And one of the ways we do it is using screening instruments, rating scales. This is the herding tool. It's the marketing departments of pharmaceutical companies often who distribute instruments like this to doctors or clinics, knowing that if the rating scales are filled up, the rating scale causes a problem that the drug becomes the solution for.
Amy Philo from Frisco, Texas, had a very nasty experience that illustrates what can happen in the US when the government allows the pharmaceutical companies to control healthcare. They jailed the new mother.
I had some really horrible things happen to me after Isaac was born. He was having a really hard time adjusting to nursing, so we had given him some formula, which he couldn't digest, and he threw up. And we had to call 911 because after he had thrown up, he looked blue, and I couldn't wake him up. But when we got to the hospital, he almost choked to death. Like he started to vomit, but it got stuck. Luckily, they saved him. And when we got to go home finally, I started to panic because I was worried about him. So I was placed on medication because I was told that I was at a high risk of postpartum depression and I needed to get on it immediately. They gave me Zoloft. I was on 50 milligrams of Zoloft for 3 days. On the third day, I had a hallucination of killing my son by throwing him down the stairs. So I went to the psychiatric hospital where they tried to give me more drugs, and they tried to lock me away from my baby and keep me there for a really long time, but I was able to get home to my son, luckily, and I was told I couldn't leave that hospital unless I kept taking medication. They convinced me that it wasn't me. It wasn't the medication, it was me. So I had to stay on it, and I was going to a psychiatrist who raised my dose twice. And each time that she raised my dose, the thoughts about killing my son were more intense. First, it was just, I had thoughts of killing my son all the time. And then with the second dose increase, I started to imagine killing my family. I was imagining killing Joel, my husband, killing my mother, and killing my 2 cats, and killing my neighbors, and killing the baby, and killing myself.
2001 hade min man fått veta att han hade prostatacancer. Och han berättade aldrig det för mig. Utan att han gick in i en depression, och i och med att vi inte bodde tillsammans utan var särbo då, så förmörkade han det för mig helt enkelt. Istället yttrade sig hans depression i svartsjuka. Att han trodde att jag träffade andra män. Och när jag sa till honom då att hans svartsjuka var inte mitt problem utan hans eget då, och det var en sak som han var tvungen att lösa själv. Och då tog han sitt liv. Och efteråt fick jag veta då, när jag läste journalerna, så fick jag ju veta då att han hade fått den här cancerdiagnosen och att han hade fått Zoloft som han åt. Och att datumet stämde då att han hade ätit precis 12 dagar när han tog sitt liv. Hans svartsjuka, den fanns aldrig innan, utan att vi hade en bra relation. Och Jag pendlade till honom och vi var mycket i naturen och han kom hit till mig och vi gick på konstutställningar. Och det var aldrig något problem innan han började äta medicin.
I was on Zoloft 150 milligrams and nothing, like it wasn't working. No matter how long I waited for it to work, it was just getting worse. And at that point in time, the FDA issued a black box suicide warning on antidepressants. And my mother convinced me to start reading up on antidepressant stories online about how they were causing homicides and suicides. So I decided I wasn't going to give it any more time to work and I was going to wean off of it and see if I got better. And when I did get off of Zoloft, against doctor's orders, I was better. I was back to my normal self. And I had been told, you can't have another child because you'll go crazy and it's always more dangerous after you have more than one. And you're always going to get postpartum depression again. But I had a second child and I didn't have a single problem. I never had any kind of mental issues. I didn't even have health issues of any kind after him. And he's wonderful. And so when I look at him and think that I could have possibly not had him because of their warnings to me, it makes me extremely angry. But I'm very thankful for him, and he's proof to me that I didn't need anything and I'm fine. And so it makes me extremely sad that they tried to take that away from me. And it makes me very sad for any mom in Sweden who might also be going through this because of a drug.
Let me tell you about Victor Motus. Victor Motus was a successful businessman. He had several restaurants. He was the head of a school committee. He was a mayor in the town in which he lived. And because of his work for the community in which he lived, he was due to get an award from President Bill Clinton. He had to fly to Washington to get the award. He was going to meet Bill Clinton and was going to get an award for the work he did. A week before that, he had complained to his wife that he was having trouble sleeping. She organized him to be brought to the doctor. The doctor's notes don't show that he was depressed. The doctor's notes show his only complaint was that he wasn't sleeping well. But the doctor told him that this was a sign that he was depressed, because doctors have been educated by drug companies to think just this way. The doctor put him on an SSRI and told him it would take a few weeks for this pill to work. 2 or 3 days after he was put on the pill, Mr. Motus became clearly more restless, more anxious. He told his wife that the pills weren't suiting him. His wife and his daughter told him, but these pills take a few weeks to work. You have to continue taking them. He did continue taking them, and on the 6th day on the pills, the day he was due to fly to Washington, Victor Motus got up early, got in his car, drove his car a few miles away from his house, took out his gun and shot himself through the head.
After she died, I saw that it was happening, you know, all over the country, all over the world. I was shocked. I was horrified, and I wanted to make people, you know, stop it from happening to others, you know. And unfortunately, when it happens to your own daughter, you think, oh, if only this, it's terrible, but if it could just be the last time, you know, then maybe it would be all right in some way, but it hasn't been the last time at all.
Tack och lov så läser ju inte patienterna, de lyssnar mer på vad vi säger. Det finns ju den här varningstexten, är ju, texten i FASS är tycker jag, ja, snudd på tokig. För där står till ungdomar under 18 år ingenting om nyttan av medicinen. Och den här att 1 på 50 kan få mer självmordstankar. och självskadetankar beskrivs oerhört kraftigt. Och att nyttan, att 1/3 får en väsentlig nytta av medicinen, av de som tar den, det tonar man ju ner helt. Vi har ju ibland problem att man måste skriva jag menar verkligen detta. Det finns en term som heter sick. Jag menar verkligen detta om man skriver ut fluoxetin till en 17-åring. Annars expedierar inte apoteket för då vill de vara säkra på att vi har läst varningstexten och verkligen menar detta. Så bekymret är ju en del att man får byråkrati, att man då måste ringa tillbaka till apoteket och säga att man verkligen menar det. Så det är en del apotekspersonal som läser texten mer, tror jag, än vad gemene man gör, för de lyssnar mer till vad vi säger.
Cirka 2 år efter Johans död så gick jag själv in i en depression. Det kändes att jag hittade inte en väg tillbaka till livet. Och jag fick Cipramil utskrivet. Och i början gjorde det att min sinnesstämning höjdes en aning. Men sen efter några veckor så gick jag in i zombieliknande tillstånd. Att jag inte kunde varken skratta eller gråta eller reagera känslomässigt på något sätt. Då. Och när jag talade med min läkare om det här så sa han att jag absolut inte skulle sluta med medicinerna utan han höjde dosen. Och jag åt några månader men mådde ändå sämre. Och på eget bevåg så började jag trappa ner. Efter att jag började se konstiga bilder. När jag såg en kniv såg jag i en 10-del sekund hur jag tog tag i kniven och tryckte den i min dotters bröst. Likadant om jag såg en sax eller några andra vassa föremål så såg jag alltid hur jag tog tag i det och slog dem i min dotters bröst och dödade henne. Och det förstod jag att det här var inte riktigt utan att det här var medicinpåverkan. Så jag började trappa ner medicinen mycket sakta och skrev dagbok. Och när jag började trappa ner medicinen så fick jag precis som åskväder i huvudet. Enorma elektriska urladdningar och blixtrar och väldigt mycket biverkningar. Och nedtrappningen tog faktiskt 7 månader innan jag var helt fri från alla de här biverkningarna.
What we've got today is a screening program, an intensive screening program in antenatal clinics, which involve giving rating scales to women. And an awful lot of women who are pregnant have many of the features of a mood disorder. They may be more irritable. They may not be able to sleep as well. They will meet criteria for depression, but they're not depressed. They're pregnant. But on these rating scales, they will score more highly than when they weren't pregnant. Actually, if we repeat the rating scales more than once, you can often see that the score drops off without treatment, but the rating scales aren't repeated. On the basis of one rating scale, the woman will often be told she's depressed and that she should go on antidepressants. It was rare 20 years ago to give women antidepressants. Now, in some countries, the rate at which women are on antidepressants during pregnancy is up to 10 or 15% of women. This has been an extraordinary change and is very worrying.
SSRIstories.com. It's a website that I'm proud of having been one of the co-founders. I was part of a group that was circulating stories that were similar to my daughter's or were examples of violence, murder even, murder-suicide, or just bizarre behavior, road rage, all kinds of things that people on antidepressants were doing. And it just seemed from seeing all these stories that it couldn't just be that the people were sick, because the patterns were so similar, and very often it was when they were just starting the antidepressant or changing the dose. And so I thought it would be very powerful to have those stories in a database rather than just a list, and a database where you could sort according to drug or type of event or the place.
There's a very important issue here for the police or anyone involved with crimes of one sort or the other. In the case of people who commit suicide in unusual circumstances, for instance, or homicides that are very unusual or frenzied, or other crimes where the perpetrator of the crime appears to have no motive at all, the police are often aware that they are on one or other of the antidepressants. It's very important to bring this to the attention of the courts. It isn't the case that everybody who's on these drugs who commits a crime should be excused their crime because they were on the drug, because there's a lot of people who commit crimes in the normal way on the drugs, and they should be held fully responsible for their crime. But there is a group of people who would not have committed the crime were they not on the drug, and it's important for the justice system to recognize this group of people. The courts will have a problem because as a society we haven't worked out properly yet where responsibility lies in these cases. The responsibility to some extent lies with the experts who deny there could be a problem. The responsibility to some extent lies with the pharmaceutical companies who for a long time have denied there could be a problem. These are tricky issues to get to grips with, but the use of the drugs is going to be much, much safer if people recognize for some people there can be a problem. This recognition needs to start right when people get put on the pills. First, they need to get the right warnings, and it also needs to go all the way through until perhaps after they've killed themselves or after some crime has been committed. People need to be aware of the role the drugs may have played, even at that point.
Matt Miller was 13. He died in June 1997 in Kansas. His parents had taken him to the doctor. He was acting out after the family had moved from another town. The doctor gave him a sample pack of Zoloft. Kara Baker was 12 years old. She died in June 2001 in Idaho. She'd been on Paxil for 7 months. Her appearance and demeanor drastically changed. She left a note for her mother. Julie Woodward, 17, died July 2003 in Pennsylvania. She hung herself after 1 week on Zoloft that she'd been given for school adjustment issues. Beth Winters, 22, June 2003. 7 days after starting Paxil, she hung herself in the hallway of her family home. She had eating issues, a little trouble sleeping. Alex was 19, fall of 2003 in Vermont. He shot himself. He'd been on Zoloft for a few months for problems adjusting to college.
When has a society decided to sacrifice the safety, the health of its own children for an industry?
After 8 years of taking medications, I now had to deal with everything that I had suppressed. So it never went away, it never went away. It threw me into manic episodes of just unbelievable. Day to day was just, I never knew what to expect because it would just hit me. I had to learn how to cope with life all over again. if my doctor would have just told me, you know, are you getting enough sleep? Are you taking your vitamins? Are you eating right? Are you drinking enough water? Are you exercising? Pretty much, are you taking care of yourself? I would have probably never had to go on antidepressants because it would have given me an outlet to deal with those feelings and the sadness and the grief and the loss that I was dealing with in a healthy way.
One of the things that's going on here is that as the suicide rate goes up during the 60s and the 70s, the autopsy rate, the post-mortem rate also goes up. When the suicide rate begins to fall, before the SSRIs come on the market, the autopsy rate has begun to fall. If we don't do post-mortems, we don't find the suicides, and we don't find the homicides either. A large number of suicides and homicides are only found, are detected at post-mortem. And because we're doing so many fewer post-mortems now than we used to do before, this is the likely reason why we appear to have a lower rate of suicide. In all the countries where the autopsy rate has fallen, the rate of suicide has also fallen.
Danuta Wasserman is like a spider in a Swedish network that deals with research into suicide. They know about the risks associated with SSRIs, but unfortunately they're doing their best to tone down the problems.
Själva medicinen kan framkalla biverkningar som jag har talat om. Antingen aggressivitet eller djupa självmordstankar eller självmordsförsök. Men det är väldigt sällsynt och det såg man mest hos de som är 24 år och under. Så att alla studier visar att alla andra åldersgrupper gagnas av denna typ av behandling.
Wherever murder and suicide occur, we find shock, grief, despair, as well as all too often SSRIs.
Jag är ordförande i SPE Stockholms län och det har jag varit sedan år 2000. Och jag arbetar med sorggrupper för efterlevande. Och under de senaste 3 åren så har jag blivit förundrad över när efterlevande berättar att cirka efter 4 veckor försöker läkarna övertala dem att äta antidepressiva mediciner, SSRI-preparat.
Policemen, politicians, you know, what are the consequences of these people taking antidepressants and having their emotions flattened and their judgment impaired and their conscience altered? På Google kan man läsa att sådana biverkningar finns. Men sen vet jag att distriktsläkare, väldigt många av dem har olika sjuksköterskegrupper eller telefon och sånt. Då säger man att märker du att du inte mår bra? Man behöver inte alltid säga att du ska få ångest eller slå din hustru eller få självmordstankar därför att det skrämmer bara. Men märker du att du mår inte så bra, då får du ringa och ge telefonnummer. Liksom att man ska ha ett konkret uppföljningssystem.
One of Sweden's foremost experts in CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and suicide is Professor Jan Beskov in Gothenburg. In its guidelines from 2010, Sweden's National Board of Health and Welfare recommended both cognitive therapy and antidepressants, something Jan Beskov disagrees with.
Man bör inte ge rutinmässigt antidepressiva plus KBT. Därför att då vet man sen inte vad det är som har verkat. Och eftersom antidepressiva mer och mer tenderar att bli en livslång behandling och vet man inte om det är den som har verkat eller KBT som har verkat, så försätter man patienten kanske i en långvarig behandling som är helt onödig, som dessutom ger honom en hel del biverkningar. Så att så långt man kan, en behandling i sänder, och det är en vanlig princip inom all forskning också.
A country like Sweden, countries that haven't gone through all this, you're being targeted now. And beware of guidelines for doctors that are written by doctors who are getting paid by the manufacturers of the drugs that they're pushing. This is drug pushing on a major, massive scale.
Och med den erfarenheten som jag själv har idag av antidepressiva så är jag helt övertygad om att preparaten har med både min sons och min mans död att göra. Ingen hade talat om för min man heller att du kommer att må sämre när du börjar ta de här preparaten. Och att man ska vara uppmärksam.
There are in fact also Swedish psychiatrists who believe that it is important to be aware of the risks. One of them is Bo Runesson, professor at the Karolinska Institute and chief physician at Capio St. Göran's Hospital in Stockholm.
Jag tror att den risk som finns för självmord när man tar antidepressiva läkemedel har ett samband med den förstärkta ångest man får i vissa skeden av behandlingen, särskilt tidigt. Men det är väl också så att det finns människor som upplever att den antidepressiva medicineringen tar bort en del av deras nära förhållande till upplevelsen av omvärld och nära personer. Att man blir lite mindre känslig, på gott och på ont.
Göran Högberg, chief physician and psychiatrist in Stockholm, has for a long time warned about the danger of SSRIs.
Tidigare så trodde man att självmordshändelserna inträffade i början av behandlingstiden, men TAD-studien visade med 15% självmordshändelser för fluoxetingruppen att de inträffade under hela behandlingstiden, vilken var 9 månader.
Kanske är det så att antidepressiva medel av det slag som vi mycket använder nu gör att man blir lite mindre bekymrad om sånt som normalt sett bekymrar en. Att man blir lite okänslig. Att man kanske bryr sig lite mindre. Och därmed finns ju en risk att de normala spärrar man har därför att man tar hänsyn till omgivningen inte är lika starka.
Och sen har vi också det här med sexualiteten som blir negativt påverkad i många fall, både hos pojkar och flickor. Och det här är allvarligt därför att ungdomar är ju färdiga med att upptäcka kärleken.
Den formen av att man är mindre bekymrad om sånt som annars är viktigt kan ju göra att det är lättare till att man då också bortser från hur ett självmord kan skada omgivningen.